The rain had been falling. For 3 hours when Elias Boone heard someone pounding on his ranch door, he reached for the lantern and opened it. A woman stood on the porch soaked from head to toe, her worn dress covered in mud. Behind her were 8 children, huddled together beneath a torn wool blanket. The youngest boy was barely 5. The oldest girl could not have been more than 15. The woman lifted her trembling eyes. "Please," she whispered. "She only needs a roof for tonight. Tomorrow she can go." Elias looked at the children. "They're all yours?" The woman nodded. "My name is Clara Whitmore." Elias stared at her pale face. "Where is their father?" Clara looked toward the darkness behind her. "Dead." One of the little girls began to cry. Clara quickly pulled her close. "We haven't eaten since yesterday morning," she said. "I wouldn't ask if there was anywhere else to go." Elias Boone owned one of the largest cattle ranches in the county, but wealth had never made him generous with his trust. He lived alone in a large house at the edge of the valley, with only a ranch hand named Amos and an old hound for company. He had buried his wife 6 years earlier. Since then, he had kept his heart behind the same locked door as the spare room. Still, he stepped aside. "Get inside." Clara froze. "You mean it?" "I said get inside before the children freeze." The 8 children hurried past him. That night, Elias discovered something strange. The children were not wild or demanding. They were quiet, too quiet. The older ones helped the younger ones dry their clothes. The 12-year-old boy, Samuel, tried to fix a broken chair without being asked. The youngest girl, Annie, kept one hand wrapped around her mother's dress as if she was afraid Clara might disappear. Elias watched them from the doorway. "What happened to you people?" Clara lowered her eyes. "It's a long story. Then start tomorrow." The next morning, Elias expected them to leave. Instead, he found Clara in the kitchen, washing dishes before sunrise. "You don't owe me work," he said. "I know. Then why are you doing it?" She looked at the 8 sleeping children through the open doorway. "Because I have spent my whole life earning every meal they eat." Elias said nothing. Clara continued working. For the next several days, the children slowly became part of the ranch. Samuel helped Amos with the horses. The older girls gathered eggs. The little ones chased chickens around the yard. Annie followed Elias everywhere, asking questions about horses, cattle, and the mountains. But Clara remained guarded. Whenever Elias asked about where they had come from, she changed the subject. Then one afternoon, Elias noticed Clara staring at an old photograph hanging above his fireplace. It showed Elias standing beside his late wife, Margaret. Clara's face went white. "You knew her?" Clara stepped backward. "No." But Elias saw the fear in her eyes. That evening, he searched through an old wooden trunk he had not opened in years. Inside were letters from Margaret. One letter stopped him cold. It was dated 8 years earlier. Elias read it twice. Then a third time. Margaret had written about a woman named Clara Whitmore. She had written that Clara's husband, Daniel, had worked for her family before moving west. She had also written something Elias had never known. Daniel had been accused of stealing money from the Boone Cattle Company. Margaret had believed he was innocent. Elias's hands tightened around the letter. Daniel had been fired. Months later, he disappeared. Elias remembered hearing that he had died in a mining accident, but Clara had 8 children, and now she was standing inside his house. The next morning, Elias confronted her. "Your husband was Daniel Whitmore." Clara stopped breathing for a moment. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you would throw us out." "Did Daniel steal from my family?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "No." She reached inside her dress and pulled out a small folded paper. "Your wife knew the truth." Elias took it. It was a letter from Margaret to Clara. In it, Margaret explained that she had discovered the real thief. The money had been taken by a foreman named Silas Crow, who had blamed Daniel to protect himself. But Margaret had never gotten the chance to expose him. She had died suddenly before she could tell Elias. Clara wiped her eyes. Daniel found out later. Crow threatened him. "Daniel tried to bring the truth to your family, but Crow followed him." "What happened?" "He was killed on the road." Elias stared at the letter. For 6 years, he had believed Daniel Whitmore was a thief. All those years, he had hated a dead man who had been innocent. But there was more. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out another document. "Crow is back." Elias looked up. "He wants this ranch." The document was a land claim. Someone had forged papers showing that Elias's property belonged to Crow's business partners. "Why come here?" Elias asked. Clara's voice broke. "Because Daniel spent his last days trying to protect your ranch. Before he died, he told me that if anything happened to him, I was to take the children to Elias Boone." Elias stared at her. "He trusted me. He said you were the only man strong enough to uncover the truth." Elias looked toward the 8 children. For years he had believed his wealth had protected him. Now he realized it had only made him blind. That night, Crow arrived with 3 armed men. He stood outside the ranch house and shouted that Elias had until sunrise to leave. Elias walked onto the porch. "You've got the wrong man." Crow laughed. "No, I finally found the right one." Behind Elias, Clara gathered the children. The ranch hands came running. Elias did not reach for his gun. Instead, he held up Margaret's letter. "You forgot one thing." "Silas." Crow's smile disappeared. "Your own signature." The letter contained Crow's handwriting, matching the forged land papers. But Crow lunged toward him. Amos stepped between them. The ranch hands surrounded Crow's men, and before anyone could fire, the sheriff arrived with a warrant. Clara had sent Samuel to the nearby town earlier that afternoon with copies of the documents. The sheriff recognized Crow's name immediately. Years ago, another rancher had accused him of the same scheme. Crow was arrested before he could escape. When the sun rose, the rain had finally stopped. Elias stood outside the barn as the 8 children played in the wet grass. Clara approached him. "I should leave," she said quietly. Elias turned. "Why? Your troubles are over now." He looked at her. "No, Clara, my troubles started 6 years ago when I stopped listening to the people who needed me." She lowered her eyes. "You don't have to carry us." Elias looked at the children. "I've carried an empty house for 6 years." A small smile appeared on his face. "Maybe 8 children are exactly what that house was missing." Clara began to cry. Elias looked embarrassed. "I wasn't very good at being kind before. You were kind enough to open the door." He shook his head. "No, you opened mine." Months passed. The ranch changed. Samuel learned to ride beside Elias. The older girls helped. Clara started a small schoolhouse for the younger children. Annie claimed the old hound as her best friend and followed Elias around the ranch every morning. And Clara? She stopped looking at the door as if she might have to run through it. One evening, she and Elias stood beneath the old cottonwood tree overlooking the valley. "Do you ever regret letting us stay?" she asked. Elias smiled. "Every morning." Clara looked surprised. "Why?" "Because every morning, I wake up wondering how I ever lived without all this noise." She laughed through her tears. For the first time in years, Elias heard laughter where there had once been silence. The 8 children had arrived at his door seeking shelter from a storm. But the truth was they had not been the ones who needed saving. They had saved a lonely cowboy from a life without family, and the woman who had begged him for a roof had unknowingly given him something money could never buy, home filled with voices, forgiveness, and 8 little reasons to open his heart again.